Dear ladies, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We are going to study today, or we are going to, in fact, explain today Blake's um, uh, powerful poem, which is known as London. It is known as London because in this poem, the writer is going through a description of London and the life that the Londoners, and especially the poor people, are living, and the type of life they are undertaking. In fact, the London is considered as one of Blake's best known and most powerful short poems. It is very short, but each of its stanzas are pregnant and profound with meaning and imagery and ideas. This poem is offering a keen sense of indignation that Blake felt at the social injustices of his day. In this poem, he is referring to the injustices, and especially social and religious injustices that are people undergoing, and as I said, especially the poor people. Blake lived in London, and he is supposed to be the speaker of the poem. Many critics say that Blake, in none of his poems, was the speaker, but in this poem, he seems to be the speaker. Yet, we are not sure of this. The speaker is walking through the streets and he records his impressions of what he sees and what he hears. He uses his senses to perceive what is happening in the lives of these people under the shackles of law and under the shackles of church and the state. Blake thought that people did not have a clear understanding of the way they should have they should or the way of life they should be living, which is supposed to be lived in joy and freedom. He is blaming not only the church, not only the state for enslaving people, but also he is blaming also the people themselves and their minds, their way of thinking, that they limit themselves to some beliefs and some laws which are causing them emotional and physical suffering. Now, one may ask why Blake is emphasizing or is describing or is confining a whole poem for the description of London. Because the answer for this is that because London has been always referred to as an honorable antiquity, as an honorable historical city, not because of its legendary history, but because it is of its actual history. Now, Blake wants here to do what? He wants to announce what type of life the people in that city are living, and how their life is confined within the shackles of the Industrial Revolution. Although he himself was brought up on this banner of London's excellence among other cities. And during the time of Blake's writing the poem, when he was writing London, London, the city, was, and is still now, was the one of the busiest, most developed urban environments in the world. The poem argues that this way of life, the urbanized life, which is focusing on economics, which is focusing on individualism, which is focusing on industrialism, is not the correct way of life, and it is fundamentally flawed. When we go through the summary of the poem, here we see that the speaker is taking a walk through the streets of London, and this walk brings the speaker near the river Thames, and the river, it is one of the most influential, let's say, sites in London. In fact, sometimes the river Thames is referred to as a symbol for the city of London, and we are going to see why. This river seems to have its course dedicated or dictated for its flow throughout the city. Even the speaker tries to show that even the river is not free in its course. It is not free in its flowing through the city, throughout the city. It is also its path, its way, its road is dictated for him, for it. Sorry. The speaker sees signs of resignation and sadness in the faces of every person whom the speaker passes through or passes by. All the faces of the people are full of resignation, subjugation, sadness, submissiveness, passivity. Okay, so all these gestures, or in fact, not gestures, we say signs and marks, are drawn on the faces of every person in that city. We will see why. Also, he hears. He is not only perceiving or understanding these signs of sadness through his seeing, through his sight, but also he hears the pain too. In the cries of men and fearful newborn babies, everybody he hears this pain through what? Through the crying babies, through the men who are crying for their miseries, and even for the prostitutes, the fallen women. In fact, in every voice in the city, in every law or restriction London places on its population, the speaker can sense the feelings of being oppressed and controlled by the city life. Also, he hears the cries of the young chimney sweeps. We have already discussed the chimney sweepers' suffering, and this misery is brought to them. This misery, those people's misery is bringing shame on the church authorities, because the church is not finding any solutions for those children or men or women or newborn babies. Thinking of the unfortunate British, also the speaker is thinking of the soldiers who are dying for the sake of the British, triumph. Okay, and this dying was in vain. They are not dying because they have their own beliefs in something that is moral or ethical. They are dying only to gain money. They are dying. They become soldiers to gain some salary because they are starving. So they want to keep themselves away from starving by being soldiers. The speaker is imagining their blood running down the walls of the palace. So the walls of the palace of the government. The palace is a sign for the government, for the state. The wall of the palace, or the walls of the palace, are all stained by, shamefully of course, they are stained by the blood of these soldiers. Then, which is the most important and most, most painful sight that the speaker goes through, is when he hears the midnight cries of young prostitutes. These prostitutes, these women who have sold their bodies in order to keep themselves alive from starving, to survive. They are so young. So when he talks about young, he didn't talk about all the prostitutes. He's talking about young prostitutes who curse their situation. And these prostitutes are giving birth to newborn babies, and also those newborn babies are crying, and their crying is a very miserable sound, which shows the misery of children. Even the newborn child is not, kept away from this misery. Okay, and we are going to go through. Dear ladies, in this stanza, in the first stanza, we are going to go as accompaniers to the speaker. We are readers. We are going to accompany the speaker in his walk, and we are going to go through his narration of what are the signs that he is going to see, the signs of misery, of course, of suffering, that he is going to see through his walk. The speaker tells us that as he was going through the streets of London, he's going to record his impressions of what he sees and what he hears. He is going to go through these streets, and London has some charters, some permissions that are given to charters means documents. London is famous for the documents that are the legal documents that are giving permissions or denial of what to do about a certain place or what to do about a certain factor. Okay, so immediately, as these charters are well known as a mark for London, he is immediately going to mention these charters. Of course, these charters are going to be related to London, to the streets and the river. When he refers to charters, as if he wants to refer to the idea of freedom and liberty, because these charters are representing some legal documents for granting freedom, for granting liberty in a certain aspect of life. So from the very beginning, the reader is going to the speaker is going to say that I wandered, and when he uses wander instead of walking, he means that his walk was aimless, was unintentional. So this suggests that as he was wandering, these signs of miseries, of suffering, of pain were coming to him unintentionally. So he was not scrutinizing to find these signs. The signs are so obvious that in his aimless walk he could perceive them, he could capture them in his sight and in his hearing. Also, and when he says wander, it also suggests some kind of freedom, that he was free in his wandering. He was not under the strains, under any strain, and these strains are suggested by which word? By chartered. Later we are going to see that charters are not referring to liberty, otherwise it is going to be referring to shackles, to strains, to limitations. Okay. Now when he talks about the charters, as if he wants to show that these chartered streets and the chartered, of course, the river, are all related to the modern society, to the modern urban city. Okay, why? Because it is clear through the speaker's eyes and ears, the reader is getting a strong sense of the decimal life of Londoners. The people are marked by weakness and woe. The streets and even the river. Now here, why he is considering chartered is a reference to subjugation and submission. He says that even the streets and the river are chartered. That is, their courses have been decided for them. The river, although the river is a symbol of freedom and a symbol of liberty, in every literary work when we refer to a river, it means it is a reference to liberty and freedom. But the reference here to the river and the streets as being chartered, it means that even those signs were not free in their courses. Their courses have been decided according to the plans, of course, which were put in building the city of London. The rivers are often considered as a symbol of freedom, but they are not referred to as a symbol of freedom in the poem London. Black's use of the word chartered twice in this first stanza, both for streets and for London. Why? Because the even the natural geographical feature, the river Thames, have been mapped out and demarcated by man. So it is man who decided the course of London, of the river, not the river by itself, not according to some natural geographical feature. The chartered streets specifically hint at the way London is a kind of a cage. Since these streets were mapped by man, as if man is putting the Londoners in some kind of a cage, and that man who have built this cage, he keeps the inhabitants of London within the confines of their pens. So these streets, which are chartered, which are mapped, which are drawn by a man, when he decided to, by the people who decided to build London, as if they were making a cage, a London cage, to keep the inhabitants in that place, in that city, to be to be suffering under their pains, and they don't have any way out, as if it is a cage and the Londoners are the caged who are confined to their pain. Blake suggests that many human miseries are caused by the systems and laws other men have imposed upon the poorest. So these poor people were not free in choosing their miseries. These miseries were put upon them because of some other people who are related to the system of London, of law and of the church. Later he's going to blame both the state and the church. The last line is emphasizing on a very painful sign. The writer, or the speaker, is emphasizing that he hears the cry of every infant, a child who hasn't even learned to talk yet. He is crying. He is crying because he is oppressed. He is just like any other man in this city, any other feature in the city. It is suffering of oppression. It is as if everyone is being kept in slavery, but the manacles they wear are not literal ones, but mental, mind-forged ones. Somehow they are even more powerful, since they mean the oppressed is unlikely ever to rise up and challenge that which tyrannizes over them. Here the writer means what? He means that even the child is oppressed, but this oppression, since the child is a reference to what? Is a reference to passivity. The writer is saying that these people are forged, or they are oppressed because their minds are forged. Their minds are shackled, are restrained. They don't think of rising up against this oppression, or challenge this oppression and challenge the people who are making of themselves as tyrannies against them. Now the writer here, you know what, London was written after 5 years from the rise of the let's say rebels of the French Revolution, as if the writer is saying, or the speaker is saying, these people are leading themselves to their suffering because their minds are shackled, their minds are forged, and let's say these manacles, these shackles, القيود, are more powerful because they are mental. The mental manacles are more powerful than being oppressed by some physical aspect. Dear ladies, moving to stanza 2. In stanza 2, the speaker is going to record the impressions of more signs that he goes or he passes by in his walk. He is now hearing what? He hears pain everywhere, and that's why he repeats in every voice, in every sign that he goes by. He is going to feel that there is a voice of pain. He says in every voice, even that of the newborn babies, and it is caused by these, let's say, shackled mentality. Pain is going to continue. He says that these manacles, these strains or these restraints, are some type of physical. Manacles means some type of physical restraint. But these particular manacles in the poem, they are the manacles of the mind. So they come from a thought that the restraint is somehow mental, not or thoughtful, not physical. The root cause of London's misery, the reason behind the Londoners' pain, is that the Londoners themselves are thinking of themselves as weak. Okay, the way the humanity thinks about itself is causing the humanity misery. The way society has been convinced and developed is leading the Londoners to their misery. Why? Because the people in London are made by the way. He is not only blaming the people for believing that they are supposed to be oppressed. He is blaming the way these people are brought up and convinced and developed in such a way that it is only through oppression they can live up their lives. The speaker suggests that society can be or could be joyful, free, and full of love, but the people's fear or greed and thirst for power have made the urban environment unbearably oppressive. It is the people who are subjugating themselves to their own oppression. London, as a poem, it is supposed to be oral, because when the writer presents his poem, he articulates it, he reads it to his readers. But although it is supposed to be an oral poem, but it is concerned with the voicelessness rather than the voice. Why? Because Blake, when he mentions that every voice, every cry, every curse, every sigh, we didn't hear any voice that is specific. All these voices are of sighs, curses, crying, but not an understandable or meaningful words that show objection or that show rejection or opposition to these restraints which keep the Londoners in their psychological chain, that chains them to their misery. In the poem, we don't see anyone who is talking or who is saying one word against his misery. It is only moaning, it is only crying, but no word which is meaningful, which shows objection or opposition to this oppression has been uttered. The poet, that is why, because the people are putting themselves in these psychological and mental chains, he uses the literary element of diacope. Diacope or diacope, the definition is here. It is a rhetorical term meaning repetition of a word or a phrase with one or two intervening words. It derives from a Greek word meaning cut into. He uses the repetition of every, and even in stanza 1 when he says chartered London streets and river Thames, this element, this figure of speech or literary element created creates what? Creates the image of a cage, because when he says every and every and every, it means that it is some cyclical or cyclic pain, that the people are not going away from them. They are enclosed in this psychic cage, or in this cage of pain. Okay, that's why he uses this literary element of diacope. Okay, the streets themselves, when he describes the streets, as if he is hinting at the limitations or the mental limitation of the people who are mind forged people, or mind forged manacles, which were introduced in line 8, or which are introduced in line 8. Here the streets are just the like the because the streets were drawn not by themselves, but by the men who built London. The mental limitations of those people drew to them their way of living. The speaker here in this stanza elaborates on what he sees in stanza 2. He hears in the voices of the adults and children many cries of distress, including curses. When he says every ban means a curse, but it has another meaning, which is some prohibition of a law. It means what? It means a law that prohibits you from doing something. Okay, again, ban, it is a reference to what? To another shackling, to another miracle. In the last line of the stanza, he describes what he thinks causes at least some of this distress. He is going to describe in the last line of the stanza who is responsible for this misery, or who is responsible at least some of this misery. The people are enslaved not by the physical tyranny only, but by a mental one. How? They are not shackled by some chains. The chain is mental. In what way? The state, the church, the authority are all bringing up those people from childhood to adulthood on one idea, that they are supposed to endure pain, that they are supposed to that the authority of the church and the authority of the state has the right to enslave them, and these beliefs are imposed on them by their rulers. Now the rulers of London, the rulers of those people, have tried to teach them through the church or the government that they are supposed to be subjugated. The same idea, at least this is a development of the same idea that Blake has presented in the Chimney Sweeper, when he blames the church that teaches the children only if you are good you are going to get the reward. So here the people are also, just like the children, they are taught that it is by obedience you can manage your life, only through obedience, only through saying yes. Never challenge your rulers. This is the idea. He is, Blake is blaming the church and the state for these mental, let's say, mental limitation, mental manacles. Dear ladies, in this stanza, the writer, or the speaker, is going to get more specific details about what he sees and what he hears. He is going to bring the attention, or draws the attention of the reader, or of the reader, yes, or the hearer, of course, to the misery of young chimney sweepers in the city. The boys are exploited by the government to work as chimney sweepers, and they were suffering either from injuries or deformities, or even they are led to their death because they want to keep themselves alive from starving. Also, another image or another person who is exploited is the soldier. The people were recruiting themselves into soldiering in order to gain their living or to earn their living, but in fact they are killed by their enemies, and they are in this way they are also used by the government, and the kings are uncaring about them. Um, Now he has two institutions that he's going to criticize. One institution is the church, and the other institution is the monarchy, the state, the ruler, the king. In the third stanza, the writer sees two institutions associated with wealth and grandeur. These two institutions are getting wealth, they are getting greatness, they gain fame, but on what expense? On the expense of, or at the expense of, children and young men. And these two institutions were invaded by the corrupting realities of the Industrial Revolution. Why? Because the first institution, the church, is leading small children to be exploited and maltreated through their employment as chimney sweepers. Also, the state is using the unlucky soldiers sent off their home to fight by spilling their blood for the kings, who are in fact uncaring, and they are exploiting them. A pause in this stanza, in the third stanza, is very important, because he says what? He says the church is turned to the color of a pall, to the color of black. Why? Because the chimney sweeps are breathing, and their breath is containing soot, and this soot with its blackness is going to cover the church. Okay, and even the pals is also the word pal, which is black, is associated with the funerals, with the idea of death. And these funerals of who? Of the chimney sweepers, who are still young, whether the children or the young soldiers. And for the young children, they die either by injury, by being injured, or because of ill health when performing their job as chimney sweepers. The word pal also carries its more familiar abstract meaning, that a pause in shocks. Also, another cry that the speaker hears. This is the cry of the child. The other cry that the speaker hears is the cry of the young is the cry of the British soldiers who were unfortunate, who were dying in vain. They lose their youth, and they shed their blood. Okay, and for whose sake? For the sake of the king. And that's why the writer gives us this image, that this blood is running down on the walls of authorities, on the walls of the palace. Okay, so he is saying what? He is saying that the sooty breath of the children is a shame for the church, and it blackens the image of the church. That's why the church's walls are stained with the chimney sweepers' sooty breath, and they turn to the black color. And the palaces or the walls of the palace are ashamed by the blood of the soldiers who are killed for the sake of this state and for the sake of the king, and their young blood, their hot blood is staining the walls of the palace. So it is something shameful. The third stanza combines two types of images: the oral, the breathing of a breath, and the visual of blackness. Images of the chimney sweeps. Sorry, ladies. Yeah, of the chimney sweeps cry, turning the walls of the church black, because as they cry, their breath is suiting the walls of the church, as if with his sooty breath. And the soldier's dying breath or sigh. When he is dying, he sighs. I mean, the soldier, when he is dying, he sighs, and the blood is running out of his mouth to stain the walls of the palace. So here, the writer is blaming these two institutions. Here, ladies, in stanza 4, there is a very painful image that the speaker is going to convey to the reader, or the wanderer who goes with him. In this fourth, and it is the final stanza, the speaker is going to add to the list of these miseries or woes or fears suffered by people in London. What is most pervasive and frequently heard sound in this in this city of London, in the streets of London, is the sound of prostitutes who are crying, cursing, not only themselves but cursing the babies, the newborn babies, to whom they give birth because of their prostitution. In the fourth and final stanza, the speaker suggests that the most pervasive and frequently heard sound on London streets is the sound of a young mother who is also a prostitute, cursing her newborn infants, crying and blighting with the plague, which with the plagues the marriage house. In fact, the speaker's intention is not. He says that prostitution leads to disease that affects not only the prostitute herself but also the newborn babies. And also another aspect, which is the social aspect, prostitution also affects marriages, because some married people are also going with relations with these prostitutes, and they are going to infect their own families with these disease, whether moral or physical disease. But here we cannot say that the intention of the speaker is to talk about or to curse or to condemn prostitution. There is another intention, that he wants to draw the attention that people's attitude to sex prevailed at that time had led many people to refer to prostitution. He says that the repressed desire of sex, when it is not satisfied, and because the people are against satisfying sexual desires openly at that time, and they refer to the people at that time, they are condemning and accusing those people who are satisfying their sexual desires with prostitution. This led to what? This led that sex will be driven, or sex will be, let's say, practiced in darkness, in the underground. So this leads to prostitution, and of course, because it is, satisfying sexual desires is going to be in the underground, it will flourish. Prostitution will flourish. So he is not only condemning or cursing prostitution, he is drawing the attention to this idea that if we are not treating others freely, they are going to do what they want in the underground, and this leads to the more or larger social problem of prostitution. Now, he emphasizes this disease by using this oxymoronous image when he says the marriage hearse. The speaker hears at midnight the cries of young prostitutes and who are cursing their situation and cursing their children. And even these miserable sounds are going to bring misery to their newborn children. When he calls when he says the marriage hearse, the hearse is a carriage which is not Araba, يعني, which is not used for marriages, for the ceremony of marriage. It is used for the funerals, where the dead body, where the tomb of the dead person put in the carriage in order to be carried to the cemetery. When he talks about this, he says that or he imagines this sound of the cursing prostitute and the children, newborn infants crying. He imagines this sound as if it is diseasing the marriage ceremony, and that's why he says the marriage hearse. It means that a marriage is as bleak as a funeral. Okay. What is more, the poem offers no real hope. When he refers to marriage, which is supposed to be a sign for a new life, when he refers to marriage ceremony as a marriage hearse, it means that marriage will end in death. So there is no hope in building a new life which is not diseased. Since there is a reference to love and death at the same time, marriage is referring to the idea of love, and hearse is referring to the idea of death, because hearse is the carriage which carries the dead people in funerals, not the wedding. It is not used. The hearse is not used in a wedding. Okay, so when he combines the two contradictory ideas of love and death, marriage refers to love and hearse refers to death, so as if he wants to say that the society will find no way, there is no real hope that society may find a way to get rid of its restraints. Why? Because these restraints are mental. They are turned to, instead of being physical, they are turned to be mental and thoughtful. Now the poem emphasizes that the next generation in closing on the youthful harlots. When the writer closes his poem by saying the youthful harlots or newborn infants, this means that the next generation will not be a joyous celebration of a new life. Instead of this image, because the newborn infants represent an image of a new life. A wedding is also a reference to, or marriage is a reference to building a new life or constructing a new life. But instead of using these images, he uses the image to turn what should be a joyous celebration of a new life into an initiation into poverty, pain, and hopelessness. So there is no hope. It implies that London's poverty is going to be just like a cycle, and the people will not have the freedom to escape these fears of poverty and pain and hopelessness. The final image of the marriage hearse is used as is presented by using the literary element of oxymoron. Oxymoron is a combination of contradictory or incongruous words to give more powerful meaning. Because he says marriage hearse and hearses are for funerals, not for weddings. By using this oxymoronous image, the writer appears to mean that the young unmarried mother's unwanted child, the children who are given birth by prostitutes, by the mothers who are unmarried, and the misery of both mother and infant are the same. They are going to be this misery is going to be the final nail in the coffin of the idea of marriage as a sacred union. So here, because this let's say these restraints continue on the idea of love away from the institution of marriage, if this idea is condemned and continues in being condemned, the idea of marriage is no more going to be considered as a sacred union. With this, the poet is going to end his poem. The image is so bleak, is so hopeless, and the writer wants to say that he is declaring his rejection to all the institutional entities that govern that sustains or shackles or manacles man's liberty and man's freedom for choices. He believes that these institutions and the way they govern people is very wrong because it is going to turn upside down. They turn life from a hopeful sphere into a very hopeless, painful sphere. Ladies, to sum it up, we are going to go through the themes to sum up what are the ideas that the writer wanted to show through this bleak image of London. The most important idea is the oppression of the urban life. Here, London is an urban environment, and this urban environment, people are so much oppressed and they don't have any hope in living. As if the writer wants to say, as much as you are far away from nature, you are going to be far away from your humane nature and you are going to be oppressed. Why? Because man in an urban city, in an urban environment, is going to be under the influence of the Industrial Revolution, and he will think only of money, only of getting more money instead of thinking of his humanity. And this is the idea that people, because they are oppressed under the realm of or under the idea of, or by they are oppressed by the idea that they must get money, they are going to lose their humanity. The poem views the modern city life as hopelessly oppressive. With the Industrial Revolution at full pace, London was undergoing significant and speedy changes. The poem argues these changes are not for the better. You don't expect that whatever development is going to be for the better. And the writer here criticizes London, that London may be just as relevant today to today's cities. London is just like the recent, modern cities. Since they are running after money, they are going to build a hopeless and oppressive life for its inhabitants. Line 2 in stanza 1, of course, it carries on the word chartered by applying it not only to the people but also to the Thames, to the river. The Thames is the river that flows through London, and it is a key part of the social fabric of the city. The Thames here, the river is just like let's say is or stands for the social fabric of the people of the city. The Thames acts a kind of a symbol in reverse. How? Because in reverse, and it is contradictory. It is a contrastive reverse. Symbol. It is a contrastive symbol because Thames, as a river, it's supposed to be a symbol for freedom, natural beauty, liberty, free flowing. Okay, while it is contradictory enough or contrastively enough in the poem, the Thames only adds to the sense of misery, limitation, and restriction. It is in no way related to the idea of a freedom or beauty. On the contrary, the Thames is seen as a dirty place, and it is, let's say, restrained by the plan which has made this river goes through the city. So it is standing or symbolizing the same restraint that the people of London are suffering from. And to emphasize the point that the city environment itself oppresses its inhabitants, the speaker gestures towards some of the desperate measures or people take in order to survive. In order to emphasize this type of oppression, the writer shows you how desperate ways people are undertaking to survive in this city life. For example, the chimney sweepers who are only children, they put their health at a great risk to earn a living. Soldiers and the prostitutes in stanza 4, they sell their bodies in order to survive. Everyone is trapped in by their situation. They are forced to exchange the only things that they have. The only thing that they have is their bodies. So they exchange these bodies in order to keep their own bodies alive. This is a very paradoxical image. And Blake, through writing the poem London, he could give. We said that this poem, although it is supposed to voice some cry against repression, but it shows that it is voiceless. Yet some critics say that this poem could give a voice to the voiceless, or rather could lend his voice to their voicelessness. It means that although there is no voice uttered in this poem against repression, yet the poem itself is going to be the writer's voice to articulate the passivity, the voicelessness of the Londoners, to suggest that such wretched misery goes beyond words. At least the theme, it is the corruption of childhood. As we said, we have talked a lot about how children are exploited and how the children are working as chimney sweepers. They are stolen from their childhood, or vice versa. Their childhood is stolen. Even the newborn babies are described as blasted by the curses of their mothers. Instead of being loved, instead of being blessed by their mothers, they are blasted, they are cursed, which gives us gestures. And I mean, when they are blasted, this gives us a gesture towards an ongoing cycle of misery. The misery is so hard for the mothers that leads them to curse their own children. So they are moving their misery. The mothers are transferring their own pain to their children. And these children, of course, later on, the new generation is going to, of course, since the children are not living an ordinary life, they are going to transfer their hardships, their hard life, to the coming generation. And also, when the writer is characterizing that the children are consistently crying, these cries are articulating what they are showing, what their fear, because they are still children. They feel fear. They are afraid of this life. They, as if we are always saying that the child, when he comes, newborn child, he is crying because he knows that he's going to find a very miserable life sometimes. Okay, as if the writer wants to say this idea that they are crying because their crying is continuous. It is non-stopping crying, because the misery is non-stopping. All this is for the newborn babies, and also the chimney sweepers. It is a very harsh and brutal and cruel experience that the children go through, and for this experience they may be injured, they may lose their health, and they may be killed by accident. And in this way, they don't have any possession. The only possession they have is their body, and they sell this possession, their bodies, in order to get money or food, or even for living, for having a place to as a home, for lodging. They give up their childhood. Dear ladies, this is all for our discussion of the play, of the poem, sorry. I hope this recording will be helpful to you to understand the whole poem. Thank you very much, and I hope we have other poems to discuss, and goodbye, ladies.